I believe we've been given opportunity in some measure in foster care, but not just in foster care, in life in general, to bear the sins of others before the Lord on their behalf. In particular for the foster children, we're asking the Lord, they're coming here with a spiritual reality and a darkness because of what they've been through. And what of that can we bear before you and confess before you so that they start in our home with a clean slate?
What is up, everyone? Welcome to the show. My name is Josh Doyle, and you're listening to the show No Longer Nomads. And I am pumped. Today, I have a guest that if you listened to the few episodes ago, he was on an episode. His name is Robert Hope. He's a good friend of mine. And we have an awesome episode in store for you today. Robert, man, thanks for jumping on the show.
Yeah, man. Happy to do it again. Last time was fun. I mean, I always enjoy just hanging out, talking. So, to do it in this format, it's nice too.
Heck yeah, man. Let's do it. Well, this is something that we shared actually after the episode stopped recording last time. We could have gone for another full hour, and I thought, let's just save this for another episode. So anyways, we talked a little about, you've got some kids that you adopted, and it was actually one of the first kid that you adopted. We were in Israel, and we can kind of share a little bit about that story. But I would love to know what went into that decision. How did you guys come to that decision? And also, how did it impact your family when you said, yes, let's do this? Because you have 4 kids, correct me, I think 4 kids in their teens. Is that right? So kind of sprinkled in out teens and some below?
Yeah, we have 4 biological children that are basically 16 to 10, and 3 boys and a girl. And then we have 2 little girls that are in the process of being adopted. And so they started out with our family and doing foster care. And that situation has progressed now to the point, as a matter of fact, in a week, we have court for one of those little girls to begin the process of finalizing the foster situation into adoption. We're kind of walking out that process, and it takes however long it takes. The court decides all that. But when Holly and I got married, we had the conversation of, do we ever want to adopt or do anything like that? And we had always said from the very beginning of our relationship, it would be fun. It would be fun to have some biological children and then adopt, and however that would look. And then probably about 8 or 9 years ago, she said, "What do you think about fostering?" And I was like, "Nah, I'm good." It just sounded like an opportunity to have a broken heart all the time. And one of the things I'm not good at is having a kid in our house and not treating them like they're one of our kids. And that means you love them, and they might go back to their parents or to a situation that you feel like may not be a good situation. And that might happen during the course of an hour, where you've had a kid live with you for 6 months and an hour later they're gone. And I was like, that sounds like opportunity just for heartache all the time. And when we started to talk about it, I really felt like this is something that the Lord's doing in my wife's heart, and I'm supposed to support it. And so we started talking. It's like, all right, what would it look like to do foster care and then potentially adopt out of the foster care? But foster care is its own deal. It's not like it's a whole aspect of love and service that's separate from adoption, but they could be related, But so we started the process. Then I felt like, okay, the Lord's moving our family into this. I'm supposed to support it. And the direction for that came from the Lord's work in my wife's heart. And then we start talking to our kids about it. And we sort of had this general rule that, everybody in the family has veto rights. So if at any point we feel like it hurts too much, or we can't love these children effectively because we want to stay guarded, then we need to not do it anymore, because these children need to be loved completely without a sense of holding back because we're afraid it might hurt. And And so you enter into it with the recognition that this could be heartbreaking, but we will enter into it for the benefit of this child, to love sacrificially like that. And it just so happens that the two that we have now, um, Lord willing, this process continues, will be in our house, forever. And but we've probably had maybe 8 or 10 children in care in the course of that time, for varying lengths. Some, a weekend, some 6 months, or longer. And my brother and his wife Foster, they had a child in their home for 3.5 years, and she went back to her family. And that's incredibly, incredibly difficult. But if that's the thing that the Lord's called you to do, He kind of has a way of seeing us through, And so that's sort of been our process in the journey of getting into it. Was the Lord really touched my wife's heart and said, "Consider this," and then she was like, "What do you think?" And then the Lord was like, "You should support this." And then all of our children, every time we get a phone call, "Hey, can you take a kid?" The whole family gets together. "Hey, there's a kid that's a potential kid. Here's everything we know, and let's pray and seek the Lord together." And we haven't said yes every time. Where there were situations we felt like this is probably not for us. And then there are situations where, as soon as I heard it, I thought probably not for us. And then as we prayed about it, I felt, no, this is the path that we're supposed to walk. The 11-month-old little girl that I think we talked about last time, we got a phone call last July, and they said, "Hey, we've got this little girl in the hospital. She tested positive. The baby tested positive for fentanyl, meth, oxy, and something else." And the baby, as soon as she was born, was put on methadone to help her come off the drugs in her system. And she had been in the hospital basically being weaned off of the drugs that they gave her to wean her off the drugs for a little over 2 weeks. And they said, "Would you guys be willing to take her?" And as soon as I heard that, we had another baby in the past that had meth in her system when she was born. And when babies come off of that, it's quite a long process. It's not as bad as like a fetal alcohol syndrome, but it's pretty rough. And so it's a long process for them to come off of it. They go through all sorts of, could potentially go through all sorts of medical stuff. And so I asked Holly on the phone, I'm like, "Are we prepared for like 6 months of hell?" Because in the past, it's like the baby wants to be held, but when you touch them, they're in pain. And so they get stiff as a board and they're crying constantly. And it's disruptive to a household. But when we prayed about it, I thought, probably not interested in doing this one. And then we prayed about it as a family, and I felt like, no, this is one I want you to care for. And so we're like, "Okay, Lord, see us through this season." She came in our house, and we sort of have a practice that when we have a kid come in the house, the family gathers around them. We all lay hands on the baby, and we just ask the Lord, like, "How do we pray, Lord?" Because there's all sorts of spiritual realities that come with them. You know what I mean? And we're asking the Lord, like, "Lord, what sins do we confess on behalf of this child?" The scriptures partly say that we're a kingdom of priests. And part of what priests did was Aaron carried the sin of the people on himself before the Lord. And I believe we've been given opportunity in some measure in foster care, but not just in foster care, in life in general, to bear the sins of others before the Lord on their behalf. And there's a lot of avenues that could go in, but in particular for the foster children, we're asking the Lord, they're coming here with a spiritual reality and a darkness because of what they've been through. And what of that can we bear before you and confess before you so that they start in our home with a clean slate? And there's also a reality they're coming underneath, like we talked about last time, our spiritual covering. It's like as fathers, we're holding an umbrella over our family that's the spiritual covering of our household. And when we do something foolish, we end up poking holes in that umbrella, and they get wet for it. And so, but if you're walking in truth, and faith in the Lord, there's an opportunity that we have to spread that covering over anybody that comes in our household. And so one of the things that we start doing immediately is, Lord, what is this child coming with that we can begin to confess, that they can be free of and have sort of a fresh start in the season that they're in our house. And if that means forever, it means forever. If it means a week, it means a week. And so that night in particular, man, when I laid my hands on that little girl, I heard a word very clearly, not out loud, but in my spirit. And that word was abandoned. And I almost felt when I heard the word that it wasn't just related to her, but to her mom as well. And so I just began to confess, Lord, there's a curse that's been put over this child called abandoned. And I confess it to you right now. And I just ask that by your power, we can break that off of this child. And so almost immediately we saw the change in her physical health. Like she came to us when babies are born, they have drugs in their system, and they start to release the toxins. It's really rough on their little skin. And she came to us. She had an open wound on her little behind. It's about as big as my pinky finger. It was an open sore.
Oof.
And so as soon as she would go to the bathroom, you got to get her cleaned up as quick as possible, because it's the toxins in it are literally eating her skin. And literally within a short, like a day or so, the wound was healed and she wasn't having the problems from that anymore. Her right eye would fall away, and it dilated different than her left eye. And within probably a week or so, her eye kind of corrected itself. And then the only other thing that we noticed, she had some tremors early on that were, she would just, shake. And then that persisted for maybe 2 or 3 months, and it stopped. And we never had any of the issues that we had in the past of just these really intense sessions of, inconsolable crying and stuff like that. Like when we look at her life, we recognize that the Lord has done a miracle just to get her to the health that she is now. Now, if you saw her now, you would never know the start that she had. We were looking back a couple weeks ago at pictures of when she first came. Man. And her skin almost looked gray. And to see her now, you'd be like, oh, that's just a healthy, 1-year-old baby. But our sense has been that the Lord has done a miracle in that. And we've
that's
seen
amazing.
him do that in a myriad of ways over all these children, where the minute that they come in our house, what we feel is that we're meant to pray over them as a family, to seek the Lord on their behalf, to begin to confess things that they've come with. And that could be confession of drug addiction or fear, or, you never know when you start to intercede for somebody, what the Lord might bring to your mind that has happened that you're called to confess. But what we've seen is that over and over, the situation begins to change in their life, their health, their emotional state. All the kids that come to care have been through trauma because they've been removed from a home,
Yeah.
And that brings its own sort of realities, and you never know how that's going to manifest itself. It could be, terror in the bathtub, they don't like water, or any host of things. There's a lot of talk in foster care about the mental care of a child and stuff like that, but they rarely talk about the spiritual realities of children. And, it's unfortunate because you see some families get kind of chewed up and spit out that had a good heart and the right motive to come into foster care. But because there's never any conversation about the spiritual realities, they enter into a situation where they end up getting chewed up and spit out. And it could have been a matter of prayer that could have started the healing process. You know what I mean? And sometimes that means the child needs to go to therapy, and there's a host of other opportunities, but there's also a spiritual reality to that often has to be dealt with when a child comes into care. And I almost never hear that get talked about.
So it sounds like you said you've had a few kids in and out of your house, and typically all of the kids, your biological kids, your wife, all of you come together, you pray, this is, yes, let's take this child on. And I'm sure there's been moments where it's very difficult to have children there. It sounds like the two you have now, it's worked really well. But how about a story or even just kind of zooming in a bit with where it can be really difficult on the family? You'd mentioned about that, and then also kind of some of the spiritual aspect. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. If that's not dealt with, that there is a lot of baggage, a lot of hurt, a lot of spiritual warfare that this little one has gone through, and if it's not dealt with and prayed through, it can end badly. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, we had a child last year, a little girl. She came into care, and we had her for about 3.5 months. And it was one of those situations. We got a phone call one morning. Hey, court happened this morning, and we'll be there to get her in an hour, and she's going back home. You think you've had her for 3.5 months. It's not that big of a deal, but if you have a kid in your house that's living as your child, even though, technically they're not your child, they're your foster child, but we don't know how to love them any different than them being our child. So the person in our family that took it the hardest was our 16-year-old son. It was rough on it was rough on the whole family, but especially he had a strong connection with this little girl. And you find that you get kids that come into your house, and they steal your heart instantly. And I remember our 2-year-old, we were in Israel together, and we get a phone call from my wife, and I get a picture of my oldest son holding this little girl. And my wife he just said, they can never take her. Like, she has to stay here now. And our 16-year-old in particular, he loves quick and big and deep. And so he gets attached, not just to the kids in our house, but his friends and that's just that's his MO. He has a big heart, and he loves.
Yeah.
And so we had this little girl in our house for 3.5 months, and she literally just stole his heart. And we get a phone call. She's gone in an hour. It was relatively devastating in our household, to the point that we're like, hey, do we need to take some time off to grieve, in a sense? It's definitely a grief, but do we need to have some time to work through the pain of this before we open our house back up to taking another child in? And so we were talking through that, and literally 4 days later, we get a phone call about the little girl that we have now, the 11-month-old. And she was 2 weeks old at the time. So we prayed about it. We ended up taking her, and our oldest son would not hold her. And we're like, you don't want to hold the baby? He's like, no, because I'm going to hold that baby, and then I'm going to get attached to it. And then they're going to come, take her away. And it's like, well, time out, buddy. This is what we talked about. Like, this is the place where, to me, it's like faith, rubber meets the road here. And the reality is, if we can't love these children fully, we need to not do this anymore. Holly and I have always said, we're not going to sacrifice our children to take care of someone else's children. And so if we need to not do this, we need to not do it. And there's no harm and no foul in that. Because our first responsibility is the children that the Lord entrusted to us. And so they're sort of our priority. And if we feel that we're doing damage to our children to care for someone else's children, we need to stop. And he's like, no, I'm okay. Yeah. Just give me a little bit of time. And I was like, okay, buddy, but seriously, if we need to not do this anymore, we won't do it anymore. And he's like, no, it's okay. And then like maybe a week or week and a half went by, and I hear him in there in the living room, and he's picking her up, and he's holding her, and he's like, I hope DHR doesn't make me regret this. and so he's connecting again, and but it's certainly at different seasons been a grieving process that we walk through as a family, where we had a child in care, that child left, and it's heartbreaking. And honestly, if we're just going to be raw about it, there are times that kids come into your house, and when you find out they're leaving, you're kind of like, okay. Like
Bummer.
there wasn't the connection there, or it was
Yeah.
a difficult situation and it's almost a relief. And then there's times where it's a huge gut punch. And so
Man.
that's part of the reality of dealing with the heartache that comes, with that sometimes. Well, from a spiritual component, yeah, we just always had the reality that when the kid comes in the home, we begin to pray for them. And one episode in particular that stands out, we had a kid a while back, and he was coming into care. He was probably, I think he was 5 or 6 months old, and we went to get him. So we foster through sort of an advocacy group. Like, so you have DHR, which is like they run everything in Alabama. That's where we are. And then there are groups that sort of are liaisons between foster families and DHR. And so for us in particular, we foster through Alabama Baptist Children's Home. And so we have our own social workers that whenever we have a DHR social worker that comes to the house, our Alabama Baptist social worker comes with them. And it's such, for us, it's been like just such an asset. And we go pick up the kid at the office for Alabama Baptist, and he's just one of those kids that, like, the minute you see him, your heart's gone. Like, it's outside your body now because you're caring for this little dude, and happy, sweet, smiling at everybody. And then literally we crossed the threshold into our house and he lost his mind. Holly's trying to get a bottle. He is inconsolable. Like, I'm trying to just hold him, and it's like I can't hold him. I mean, and there's no way a baby should be this strong. You know what I mean? So literally, we called the family around. We had another friend who was coming to say, hey, found out that we're getting this foster baby. She's like, I'll come another time. And then she's like, well, do you guys need anything? So she goes to the grocery store to pick up a bunch of stuff to bring to the house. And she's there with us. Well, all of us, family and our friend, we get around the baby. I told Holly, I was like, get some oil. We're going to anoint this baby with oil as we pray. And the minute we began to pray over him as a family, he started just to calm down. And we never had another episode like that with him the whole time he was in care.
Wow.
And dude, it was crazy. I'm telling you, it was like the coolest, chillest little dude until you crossed the threshold of our house. And then he went crazy.
What would you say to somebody listening that may not, this is a different kind of topic to them that they may not spend? What would you say? Why do you think it's that threshold of the door? What do you think that's about?
Well, for me, and I could see somebody going, well, yeah, he's in a new environment. He just freaked out. I could sure. understand that. And I could sympathize with the thought of that, except that totally. I have a worldview that says we are physical bodies that exist, but there's also a spiritual dimension to everything that's happening around us. And part of the spiritual reality that's happening around us is also happening in our mind, will, and emotions. It's part of the immaterial nature of who we are as physical beings. And I think we're much more influenced by what's happening spiritually around us than we are aware of. And in particular for that home that we were living in at the time, I had felt led of the Lord to go around the property of that house and to basically dedicate that property and the house to the Lord. And for me, what we perceived that was happening, especially after we laid hands on him, anointed him with oil, and prayed for him, and went from a 12 to a 0 as far as emotional outburst. Of what became apparent to us in that moment was the spiritual reality that was present in him could not deal with the spirituality that was present in our household, because it's a defined boundary that is set apart to the Lord. And the moment that we were able to lay hands on him, confess the sin that he came with, that extends from his family, all of a sudden he calms back down. And again, we never had an outburst. I mean, he was the happiest, most chill, go with the flow little dude you've ever seen, except for that one outburst. And then after we laid hands on him, prayed for him, we never saw that sort of thing happen again. And from a spiritual warfare reality, the evil one is playing on debts, you know. So
Hmm.
much of the time, spiritual warfare is not so much that there are swords drawn as it is a courtroom drama. And I think we have an adversary who stands in the court of the Lord to say, hey, look, I didn't make the rules. You made the rules. And this person's broke the rules. And because they've broken the rules, here's what I would like to carry out because they've done that. I mean, I see our adversary playing on the debt that we owe the Lord, and justifying himself before the Lord based on the rules that the Lord had set up. And I mean, we can talk about how that plays out for a family in particular, but when we as dads sin, and especially if we sin willfully, there's a debt that's initiated between us and the Lord. And until that debt has been made right through the confession of sin and the sacrifice, the blood of Jesus, adversary has rights to us. And oftentimes he's sort of sitting at the window
Hmm.
flinging arrows to see what's going to stick as far as temptation. And when we take the bite, we
Sure.
open ourselves up to that. And when you have generations that have consistently engaged in the same sort of sinful behavior, an attachment begins to grow between the spiritual world and the flesh. And, you know, our adversary is just coiling himself around individuals the farther they walk into brokenness, you know, and
Yeah.
that can be given to the next generation. And so when that child came into my home, I'm convinced that the set apartness of the home could not be tolerated by the spiritual reality that he existed in when he was born, and he lost his mind.
Hmm.
We, you know, once the confession of sin happened, again, he just completely calmed down. We had another scenario where we had siblings that came into our home. We were doing what they call respite care for a weekend. And so we had these two kids. We were putting them down for a nap, and they were just really, really upset. And so my wife, Holly, she sits down in the hallway outside their bedroom. She can kind of hear them fussing. And so she just sort of lays her hand on the wall. And she said all of a sudden she started having this reality. Oh, I need to confess this. I need to confess this. And as she's praying,
Yeah.
the babies calm down, lay down, and go to sleep. And
Wow.
it's just that sort of reality. It's like we don't understand the spiritual dimension that we exist in. And so we don't really know how to battle oftentimes. And we've just found over time with
Yeah.
these children. And again, man, it's not a one size silver bullet that fixes it. I'm just saying that over time we've found that as we confess sins that our children came with, all of a sudden we start to have less and less issue in our household with emotional trauma and stuff like that they came with. And of course, some of that too is the
Wow.
relationship building that happens. And sometimes it's not always an immediate fix. Sometimes as we confess over the course of months, we start to see behaviors change and stuff like that. So anyway, that's kind of how the spiritual
Man.
reality is sort of played out.
Yeah. For someone listening and they're like, hey, we would love to, I know there's two different roads here, adoption or fostering. What if there's someone that says we would love to go down, we would love to foster with the intent to adopt? I know some folks have gone that road, and just some of the hardships that they've faced. And we touched a little bit about this at the beginning, but what would you say to those people listening? I'm sure that the benefits can outweigh the hardships. But man, I'd love to hear from you because you've gone through this for many years and you've had many kids in and out of your home. What advice would you give to them listening?
Yeah, I would say if your heart is to adopt, it would probably be quicker and easier for you to enter into the system as adoptive care. You might foster 10 or 15 kids or 20 kids before you have a child that's going to stay in your home. You know what I mean? So I would say initially, count up the cost with your family. And some of that you won't know until you get in it. And then you count up the cost and you're sort of reevaluating as the process goes on. But I would say that if you want to foster to adopt, I'm not a big proponent of doing something just because there's a need.
Sure.
I would genuinely say, if you feel led of the Lord to foster, you should do it. If you don't, you shouldn't. Simply because it's going to introduce trials into your family and your life. And, pressure always exposes cracks. And so you find out real quick when stress hits where the weak areas are in your marriage and your family and stuff like that. And so even I would consider that my wife and I have a really healthy marriage, and that's a blessing from the Lord to both of us. It's a gift to both of us. If I was concerned at all about the nature of my marriage, I would not enter into it. If I was concerned at all about the path of my children, we would not have entered into it. Sensing a call of direction from the Lord and feeling that, and that's not at all to say we've arrived or anything like that, simply to say like that if there's a weakness, the enemy's coming after it. And there's not many more things more closely tied to the reality of what Jesus did for us than the pattern of adoption. It's the same picture that we're given, that we've been adopted as sons, And so the adversary hates families. And when you enter in, he's looking for every avenue to attack. And if you are not prepared for that attack, I would encourage you to spend time preparing for the attack before you enter into the battle. I was talking to a friend earlier. It's like, you do not want to learn how to shoot a gun when someone else is shooting at you.
Exactly.
It's too late at that point.
Yeah.
You want to be able to handle your weapons effectively before you get in the battle. And that doesn't mean you know everything. You're still learning along the way, and the Lord's going, hey, do you see that? And hey, here's how you function in the middle of this. And here's how you de-escalate this situation. But it's like everything else. I mean, it's a purifying situation. And so if you're asking the Lord to further purify you and call you into deeper measures of holiness, it's an excellent way to do that. And part of the reality of that, I think dads in particular bear the responsibility of imparting a measure of identity to their kids. Like I grew up, my dad used to tell me, hey, listen, you're a Hope. That's my last name, Hope. You're a Hope. If you do something foolish out in the community, it doesn't just reflect on you, but on everybody that's a Hope, And so part of what dads give their kids is a sense of identity and grounding about, hey, this is who we are. And that's really beneficial in a community of people where you're going to work together and you're going to marry people that are, reasonably within your community. And it's helpful to know, hey, you don't need to go around that girl because of her family identity, or tell my daughter, hey, that boy is not the family that you want to get involved in, And so part of what dads do is they transport, they offer to their kids a sense of identity, who they are, And to extend that to children that are coming into your care is a special opportunity, but it comes with a special battle, And so it's important before you enter in that you feel reasonably prepared for engaging in that battle. And if your family's not already in a good place, you're dangerous.
Yeah. That's so good, man. Such good advice. Let me ask you this. How would you introduce the idea of God the Father, and being adopted into a family of Christians, to your children, because they don't have a father or, someone that I do know shows I am not adopted. I don't have any siblings who were adopted. So this is a topic that I don't know a ton about here, but I do know a lot of people, that friends that have felt that hole in their entire life. They felt that they don't have that father or mother because they were given away or they were not wanted or needed. And how do you build up, I guess, that security and safety in them? And also, how do you even bring in the goodness of God the Father?
Part of that, some of that goes especially to the reality that, you know, in this conversation that we're having, is that we've also been given an identity apart from the one that we were born into. You know what I mean? And the good news is that, and this is not a trite thing. This is a heavy reality. And the heavy reality is that we've been called into a separate family, and a family that comes with its own set of identity. And it doesn't matter what your background is, that when you enter into this family, there's a family. And like you and I can give testimony to this, that you go to another country and it's someone you've never met before, but you know they follow Jesus. And there's an immediate kinship where you go, this is my brother, this is my sister. And there's something there. You could call it tribal or whatever, but there's a reality that we're in this family together. And though we've never met until right now, we feel the connected relationship. You know what I mean? It's that reality that we're
Yeah.
literally bound in unity by the Spirit together. And so I would say for children that have grown up in foster care or adoption, that are struggling with the identity that they lack from an earthly father, my encouragement to a person would be, ask the Lord, what's the identity that you intend for me to carry? What's the name that you're calling me? You know what I mean? And there's a reality within that, you know, names are important to the Lord, obviously. And it's important when the Lord, and he does this a number of times in the scriptures, where he says, you know, I'm not calling you this anymore. Now I'm going to call you this. And all of a sudden, they went from being a person with an identity to a person who had a different identity. I mean, I think about the story of Timaeus in the scripture, or Bartimaeus, who's the blind guy, and he hears Jesus approaching, and he begins to just cry out, Son of David, have mercy on me. You know, and people are trying to be like, hey, bro, you need to be quiet. And he's like, no, I know who that is, and I need him. And he says to Jesus, he says, essentially, if you look, Bartimaeus literally means son of Timaeus. So, which is an odd way to say, this is Bartimaeus, he's the son of Timaeus. That's like saying, hey, this is David, David's son, he's the son of David. Like we would never introduce anybody like that, but that's how Bartimaeus is introduced in the scriptures. Yeah. But Timaeus means value. And in the story, it's an interesting sort of juxtaposition between this blind beggar who has all of the outward identity of a beggar, but his name means son of value, you know? And all of a sudden he meets Jesus and he throws off the identity of beggar as he releases his cloak. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden he's a guy who's following Jesus with a completely different identity than he had before he met him, and an identity that had, you know, held him in darkness and bondage through his blindness. And then all of a sudden, he's not that person anymore. And so I would just say that there's a reality that bondage can be transferred into identity, a different identity, at the moment that you have insight from the Lord about what and who he created you to be. Because in the same way that earthly fathers transfer a sense of identity, we have a heavenly Father that does exactly the same thing, and can do it in such a profound way that you go from being the crazy person in the tombs to the man who transforms 10 villages. You know what I mean? And And if you're seeking a sense of identity that will last beyond just the physical reality that we exist in, and that goes even for people that have had not great relationships with their earthly dads. They had parents that they were around, but they had horrible relationships with them, and they don't feel the sense of connectedness or identity or the connection between a father that exists for them as well. You know what I mean?
So this is, as I'm listening to you, two things come to mind. Do you parent your biological children differently? Do you feel like you give an extra, anything to the kids that you're fostering in your home to show them their value, their worth? And I know they're still young kids, but do you find yourself parenting or loving them differently? And then the second question is, do you feel, I'm sure this has happened at times, that your biological children either may feel like not left out, but at times maybe, hey, Dad, what about us? Have you encountered that? If so, how have you dealt with that?
I would say in some measure, there's probably a little bit of a difference in the way that we parent foster kids for now. Well, one of the areas just right off the bat that come to mind is in the area of discipline. There are laws and restrictions based on the way that you can discipline foster children that you don't have those restrictions when you discipline your own children. And so I would say in some sense that's a small thing, or it could be a big thing, but so there's definitely a difference in the way that we're able to parent a foster child that we parent our own kids. That's probably a minuscule thing compared to the grand picture, but it definitely is a part of it. Apart from that, I mean, there's not a whole lot that we do different between the kids. Our kids have never expressed feeling left out or pushed aside. But they're also pretty integrated into how we're raising the babies as well. So like our older two, our son and our daughter that are older, well, all of our kids actually, but especially the older two are super helpful with the little ones as well. Now a little baby is a parent, they take way more attention and focus than an older kid because they need so much attention to sustain their life. And I don't know that if we had another biological kid this much later than our own biological kids, if it would have been different. I mean, they just take up time.
Yeah.
That might be that we have buy-in from the whole family. That also might be that they know that they can veto this, and so they feel invested in it. It could also be that we seek to maintain open lines of communication all the time. And so like we talked about on the last episode, we have our family worship time in the evenings, and that's been a time of a lot of family communication, meal times as well, but especially our family worship times are times of a lot of communication, and our kids are free to express what their perception of feeling or situations and stuff like that. So that we can kind of talk through and deal with it. I think raising 6 kids, my wife probably feels like she doesn't have enough time and attention to devote to everybody.
Sure.
But I think that's a special attack that the evil one reserves for moms anyway, especially moms that are doing homeschool stuff too, which we homeschool our kids. And so there seems to be a special attack that you're never doing enough or you can't care enough. And it's a lie.
Man, that's good. Well, dude, this has been a fun conversation, and I've been pumped to have you on the show, and I look forward to having you on again. And man, I know anytime you and I pick up the phone, I'm like, gosh, I wish we were recording. And so, man, pumped to have you on again. And thanks so much for joining the show. And for those of you listening, if you want us to cover a topic, you can go to nolongernomads.co and feel free to leave us a review. That would help us out a ton. Give us a rating on anywhere you find these podcasts. And thanks so much for tuning into this episode, and we'll see you next Tuesday.